I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. Final 23-man rosters for the Concacaf Nations League Finals must be submitted by March 10th, and on today's show, I'm going to try and predict what that roster might look like for the USMNT. For those watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see my screen where I'm sharing a worksheet that shows all the available players to choose from that 60-man preliminary roster that's already been submitted. And you'll be able to see as I'm building the roster live. For those who are just listening, don't worry. I'll be talking through what I'm doing step by step, so you shouldn't have any issues following along at all. Okay, so let's bring up that sheet. And what you can see here is to the right, what I've done is I've put in every single player from the 60-man preliminary roster that the U.S. has already submitted. So their final 23-man roster can only include players, from this list. I've marked what position they were submitted under. And on the right is where I'm going to build my actual 23-man roster. You'll note, for example, when you see goalkeepers, I have a number 3 listed next to it. That's what I'm going to try and go by in terms of how many players are going to fit into each position I'm talking about. Goalkeepers, I do think CONCACAF rule is you have to bring 3. But these other positions, the numbers I have there, they're a little arbitrary just based on what I typically see when the U.S. builds 23-man rosters, how many defenders, how many forwards, how many midfielders are there. But those can change a little bit, and so we might manipulate those numbers, as we're going through. The other thing I'll mention for those who are watching is that the players that you see with a green highlight, those are the players that were called into the last camp under Mauricio Pochettino, the first team camp, I should say, which was the November Nations League quarterfinals. So just to give you an idea who he called in last time. So let's start with goalkeepers. I think it's a pretty certainty he's going to bring in 3 goalkeepers. I'm going to go ahead and say that I think Matt Turner. Gotta get there we go. I'm going to say Matt Turner, and I think Zach Steffen are 2 for sure that are going to be there. I mean, Turner started every game for Pochettino. Zach Steffen's been consistently called into camp. He had the match he did play. I think it was in January camp. He did phenomenal. So I really think those are going to be his top 2. And so then that leaves Drake Callender, Matt Freese, Ethan Horvath, Diego Cochin, and Patrick Schulte as the other ones to choose between. I'm gonna make an assumption here in that MLS is going to be continuing throughout the international break. They're not going to stop playing matches, and the likelihood of this third goalkeeper seeing the field in the Nations League, semifinal or final third place game is pretty low. I mean, for a tournament setting like a Gold Cup, Copa America, World Cup, where they might be playing 5 or 6 games, maybe the chances are pretty low there too. But for just a 2-match window, I think it's just extremely low that a third string goalkeeper is going to play. I think Pochettino might say, why would I bring in a Patrick Schulte, or a Matt Freese or a Drake Callender when the chances of them playing is 0? I'd rather them stick around with their MLS teams, and play those matches. They can do more for the team by getting informed that the MLS season is still kind of young. So I think it's going to come down between. I don't think he's going to take someone from MLS for the third goalkeeper. I think it's going to come down between Ethan Horvath and Diego Cochin, for that third spot. And he did bring in Diego Cochin last time. I think he wanted to at least get a look at him. He's a young player, plays for Barcelona with a lot of upside. Ethan Horvath wasn't playing at all for Cardiff City before, but now their first string goalkeeper has an injury and he's playing and is doing pretty well. I have a feeling he's going to bring in Ethan Horvath here, so that's who I'm going to drag over for my third pick. But I think it could be Diego Cochin, or I'm totally wrong. And he does bring in, a third string goalkeeper from MLS, but these are the three that I'm going to go with. Okay, so let's move on to defenders now. And I'm going to go ahead and move these guys up and out of the way. So defenders now, what I have here is 7. I've seen him bring in, more than this. But I'm going to start with 7. And I'm going to start with bringing in 4 center backs to start off with. And I think there's some guys that are a pretty big lock. I think Mark McKenzie is going to be there. I think Tim Ream is going to be there. And I think Chris Richards is going to be there. Okay, Mark McKenzie has been getting called in regularly. He's playing for Toulouse, so he's playing at a top level. He's playing, I think he's starting every match still. Chris Richards has been on a really good run with Crystal Palace, so I think he's definitely going to get called in. A lot of people, don't like Tim Ream continuing to get called in, but the fact of the matter is he's not only been called into every camp under Pochettino, I think he's started every match, and I think he's been the captain for every match. And so until Pochettino shows me something different, I'm going to keep, as far as predictions, putting him into the roster. So that basically brings it down then between, what do we have here? 7 other center backs. Noah Kai Banks, George Campbell, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Jackson Reagan, Miles Robinson, Austin Trusty, and Walker Zimmerman. You can see Robinson and Austin Trusty, who he's brought in the past. In fact, he did bring in 5 center backs, last time, and he could do that again, but I think that was a 25, 26-man roster that he built last time, so I don't think he's going to be able to do that for a 23-man roster. So I do think this one's going to come down between Miles Robinson and Austin Trusty. And, man, it's a toss-up here, but I'm going to go with Austin Trusty. Maybe Pochettino says, again, it's like, I'm going to leave Miles Robinson at MLS so he can just, with his team in MLS, so he can just get minutes there. I don't know if that's as much of a case as the one I described for the goalkeepers. But I just think Austin Trusty maybe has more upside when it comes to looking at the potential for him being on a World Cup roster in 2026. And so I'm going to go ahead and bring him over. And but that's I think is the question: is he going to bring in Austin Trusty or Miles Robinson? Some people will shout for Noah Kai Banks, but I still think maybe he'll bring him in to get a look at him. He's, I think, 18 years old, playing in the Bundesliga, so maybe they bring him in and get a look at him. But I'm not sure if Pochettino will see him as a legitimate option for 2026. Could be wrong, because our center back pool is kind of weak. So that's another name that I think could be brought in. But I do think I'm going to go with these 4: Mark McKenzie, Tim Ream, Chris Richards, and Austin Trusty. Okay, so then that brings us to outside backs. So the last time, and I'm just going to go ahead and drag these guys up. So the last camp, Pochettino only brought in 2 outside backs. He brought in Anthony Robinson, and he brought in Joe Scally. And I think he was thinking that, Joe Scally can play either left or right back, so he could back up Anthony Robinson. He also has, Weston McKennie. He has Tim Weah that can play right back. He has Yunus Musa, who could play right back. So there's plenty of other guys on the team that could back up one of these 2 outside backs, and I think that's potentially why he only brought in 2, because there really isn't if you look at these other names, Marlon Fossey, Nathan Harriel, Shaq Moore, DeJuan Jones, John Tolkien, there's not any of those guys that I think are just going out there and dominating. I do think that there's a decent chance, though, that he will bring in one more outside back. I would imagine if he's going to bring in a third, he'd bring in a left back because he has so many other options in the squad that can play right back and have done it, many times for their clubs. And so I'm going to go with between DeJuan Jones and John Tolkien, who are the two left backs that were named. I'm going to go with John Tolkien because he made the move to the Bundesliga. He's starting week in, week out. So he's had a good run there. And Pochettino didn't get really a chance to look at him in the January camp because he, I think, was initially called in, but then he ended up, getting the transfer and going over to Germany. So I'm going to go ahead and go with John Tolkien here, but that's, I think, the question is how many outside backs does he bring in? And then does he decide to bring in 5 center backs instead of 4? I mean, those are the decisions that is going to get like potentially a Miles Robinson, or a Marlon Fosse in here, as well. Okay, so where are we now? We're going to go to midfield. Okay, and I'm just, for those who are following along, I am just cleaning up my spreadsheet a little bit. So midfield, I'm going to say what I have here is 7 different midfielders, and this is going to be one of the more challenging ones, and we might end up bumping these midfielders up to 8. We'll see. But let's go ahead and pull in the guys that I think for sure are going to be there. So we have Weston McKennie is going to be there. Yunus Musa is going to be there. Where did I see him? Tyler Adams, I'm pretty sure, I'm certain he's going to be there. Who else? I think it's pretty certain that in terms of defensive-minded midfielders, I think Johnny Cardoso will be there. I think Tanner Tessman is going to be there. So you can see we're already getting kind of full. If you look at the guys who were called in to the previous camp, hold on. For those of you who are watching, I'm just kind of cleaning up my spreadsheet a little bit. So who's some of the other names? Brendan Aronson, Gianluca Buzio, and Aiden Morris were midfielders called into the last camp. And so I don't think Aiden Morris is going to get called in because he's been hurt for a while. He is playing again, but I think he's behind Tyler Adams, Cardoso, and Tessman on the depth chart for more defensive-minded midfielders, and so I don't think he's going to make it in, especially because of the injury. I think, as I'm thinking about it, I want to pull in Brendan Aronson, and I want to pull in Gianluca Buzio as my guys. And I just think that Brendan Aronson is such an important squad player because he can fill in so many different roles for you. He's a good presser. I think Pochettino likes him, and Pochettino's consistently brought in, Buzio as well. And so that's the 7 guys I have: Weston McKennie, Yunus Musa, Tyler Adams, Johnny Cardoso, Tanner Tessman, Brendan Aronson, and Gianluca Buzio. Who have I left off? Paxton Aronson, Max Arfston, Caden Clark, Ben Kramaski, Luca De La Torre, Maximilian Dietz, Mika Anelli, Diego Luna, Jack McGlynn, Jordy Mihalovic, Matko Miljevic, Aiden Morris, Timothy Tillman, and Indiana Vasilev. I feel pretty good about that. I think, probably the first guy left off of the list is, Aiden Morris. But again, I think there's a easy answer for why, and it's just that he's been injured. Another guy that could be pushing is, Paxton Aronson, because he's been playing so well in the Eredivisie. But, I feel good about these 7 midfielders right here. Okay, let's go to forwards now then. So for the forwards, we have 6 forwards that I'm going to select here. And so let's bring the guys in. I think they're going to get selected for sure. Christian Pulisic, of course. Tim Weah, of course. And I think Gio Reyna is a pretty big certainty to get called in. Pochettino hasn't seen him yet. He's healthy. He's not playing a lot, but I think Pochettino's going to want to get a look at him. I also think in terms of strikers, I'm going to go ahead and bring in Josh Sargent. I'm going to put him right here. He's no doubt the top striker with all the injuries, right now. And so who does that leave? I think Alex Zendejas is one that I'm going to go ahead and bring him into, actually, because he's been playing so well for Club America. I don't know how you can't bring in that guy. So that gives you 4 wide players right there, and Gio Reyna could play the midfield as well. We definitely need to bring in more of a central forward, or at least I think we do. I mean, Pochettino could say, I'm just going to play Tim Weah as my backup, number 9. But I think he'll bring in a more central forward. And the guys to choose from on the list are Patrick Agyemang, Damian Downs, Jesus Ferreira, Jordan Morris, Brandon Vasquez, and Brian White. Now, I initially thought this was going to come down to Patrick Agyemang and Brandon Vasquez because Patrick Agyemang had that really good January camp. Brandon Vasquez is somebody that's been called in, before. And I thought whoever got off to the strongest start in the MLS season, that would be the person that got brought in. Neither of them have scored any goals yet. So I don't think either of them have had any real standout games. And so I'm going to lean on Brandon Vasquez here for my central forward to back up Josh Sargent, because I just think that he does bring something different. He's really good with his head, and if you need a goal late, he's somebody you might throw in there that could help you out. And Pochettino's brought him in before, and so these are the guys that I think will get brought in. The other wide players that are getting left out are Cole Campbell, Cade Cowell, Brian Gutierrez, and Griffin Yao. I feel pretty good about this list right here. And so that is it. Let's go over the 23-man roster. So for 3 goalkeepers, we have Matt Turner, Zach Steffen, Ethan Horvath. Defenders, Mark McKenzie, Tim Ream, Chris Richards, Austin Trusty are the center backs. Anthony Robinson, Joe Scally, John Tolkien are the outside backs. Midfielders, Weston McKennie, Yunus Musa, Tyler Adams, Johnny Cardoso, Tanner Tessman, Brendan Aronson, Gianluca Buzio. And then the forwards, we have Christian Pulisic, Tim Weah, Gio Reyna, Alex Zendejas, Josh Sargent, Brandon Vasquez. So who's the biggest snub here? I think from my list, I'd probably have to say a Miles Robinson, was the biggest snub. I mean, just because even though the center back position is one of these ones that we think are thin, there's not a lot of players performing at a really high level. There's a lot of guys competing for those positions. And, he's one that has been in the mix, but I think he might get, left off. Other than that, I don't know if there are any really big snubs. Now that I've kind of put this list together, I think it's pretty straight. I think it's pretty straightforward. So we'll see what happens, though. Like I said, these rosters are due on March 10th. Is that right? Yeah, March 10th, and then the USMNT will play Panama in the semifinals on March 20th. And then they will play the final if they win on March 23rd. If they lose, they'll play the third place match on March 23rd. So we're getting close. I'm excited to see this roster come out, excited to see these matches. And we'll definitely have some future podcasts, covering those for sure. Thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or that follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. Thank you so much. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X at FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.